everyone, this is Mark.
And this is Meagan from our kitchen table.
And you're listening to the Maintain the Threefold podcast, the show that seeks to build up biblical marriages that are firmly knotted to God.
And to each other for the glory of God and His kingdom.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
We're back.
Yes, we are.
It's been a fun week. We've had trick-or-treating and various other activities going on.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind, been busy, but good.
Yeah, good busy.
Mm-hmm.
We had a board game night with some students and got to have some fun with our kids playing hide and seek with teenagers, so that's always a blast. And just been a good week, and we're glad to be back with you guys to cover our two-part episode covering roles of men and women. And last time we talked about leading and shepherding for our men, and this time we're talking to the ladies, and Megan's going to be doing a lot of the talking.
Yes, I'm excited. I'd like to talk, but
she
I
likes
like this topic specifically, so, you know. And
it's focusing on help and glory. Those are the things that we're going to be discussing tonight. Now, a lot of things are encased in those two ideas, but we're going to do our best to unpack them, and then maybe future episodes get more details in and out, just like with the men. But men, even though this is an episode for the ladies, we would encourage you to stick with us, stay with your wives, listen in. What I would encourage you to do is just a lead of the household is to lead in listening to this, not necessarily to teaching of what Megan's saying. That we want to be biblical here. I don't think this is a teaching, preaching role here that Megan's going to be talking about, because she's doing a lot of the talking tonight, but really more of our wives speaking to each other and us husbands kind of being along for the ride.
Yeah.
So I encourage you to stick with us, and it's helpful for us to know what role God has called our wives to as well, so that we can lead her well, encourage her well, and help her be who God has made her to be. And that's an exciting thing to witness. So stick with us, men, and ladies, I'm excited to just let Megan have at it real quick.
Yeah, I'm excited too. This is something just honestly in the last probably 3 years that I've really delved into learning more about the specific role of women. I feel like, again, it's stuff that is not talked about. I don't know how many times we've said that on this podcast, that there's so many things that we are discovering that are really important that are just not talked about. But anyway, so as we are getting started, I just want to acknowledge that I know that this topic can be pretty touchy. Our society is now several generations into the feminism movement.
Yeah.
And so much feminist ideology has become commonplace and accepted even in the church, and we don't even realize it half the time.
It's infiltrated very deceptively.
Yes, and slowly over time. And so
oftentimes they're the guise of being nice and kindness and trying to make everyone be equal in all areas and every aspect.
Yeah.
Forever. So.
And yeah, it's a mess. But anyway, yeah. So even in many church circles, we've lost the idea that men and women were created by God, to have different roles and purposes. And many people want to argue that women can and should do anything that men can do, and that gender doesn't matter. And our society now is to the point where men and women are completely interchangeable, and that gender roles are basically a terrible form of discrimination that our society is finally overcoming, and that is a complete lie.
Yeah. They're getting so out of touch that they're creating new gender roles, and I've heard of people identifying as aliens, demons, whatever else they want to identify as, non-people. The non-binary, they don't fit into the binary that they think is holding them down, whatever.
Yeah,
So.
and all of that is just completely against God's design. You go right back to the beginning. He created man, male and female, right back at the beginning.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just really want to emphasize this, that ladies, don't believe the lies of this sinful world. God created women to be distinctly different from men, and our role is not small or insignificant or less than, though the world may say that if you believe this way, if you believe in submission and helping, and that women are different than men,
Yep.
they'll make you think that role that you're looking at is small and insignificant. But that is not true at all. But our role as women is equally important as the role of men, but it's vastly different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you can grasp the gravity and the beauty of the role that God has given us, which I think most of us have not, but if you can grasp that, I think you can understand in a new way all that the world has lost as they've muddled up these gender roles. And you can see the power that we have to show this broken world the majesty and the glory of God.
Mm-hmm. It's good stuff.
This gets me fired up. But so the first thing that we're going to look at tonight is the word help. Women were made to help their husbands. So to really grasp this, we need to turn to Genesis chapter 2. I'm going to read verses 18 through 23. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." Now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all the livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." So right from the beginning here, we see some noteworthy things. So first of all, realize that the phrase that God uses in verse 18, "It is not good for man to be alone."
As much as we desire to be alone. I think that's one of the funniest things about men, is that we have this uncanny desire to just be alone sometimes, but it is not good for us to be alone.
Yeah. And it's neat to look into this, because as you remember in chapter 1, as the days of creation are recounted, God repeatedly says it was good about the things that he created. And now we see God saying that something is not good, and that's man being alone. Mm-hmm. So I'm not trying to say that men are not good, and God's not saying that either, but he's saying that it was not good for them to be alone. So then God says, "I will make a helper fit for him." So man needed a helper and a companion. And we see later in verse 20 that nothing that God had created already could fill that role. So God created woman specifically to fill the role as man's helper.
Yeah, so you can't insert dogs, even though they're man's best friend. They're not man's best helper. You can't insert cattle or anything else. Like, that doesn't work, right?
No. So God knew the purpose that he had for mankind, and he knew that women were needed. We have a distinctive role as a helper, but that's not a derogatory term, and it doesn't make us lesser. We were designed to complement man in all the right ways in order to fulfill what God created for us as mankind to do. And I think that there's a lot of beauty and attention to detail in that. And I think that we as Christian women need to see this role as a beauty and a blessing and not a curse.
Yeah. And I think we touched on it a couple episodes ago, where the mission of mankind is to take dominion, to go and spread the gospel, to go and do many things and care for the earth. And so man could not do that on his own. He gave him a helper in woman. And it, like you said, it is a beautiful thing. And to try and tear that apart is to try and tear apart the very mission that mankind was created for, which is why all this gender ideology, creating more than two, all of that stuff is such an assault on God and what he has laid down as foundations. And so it's a very important thing for us to get these roles right.
It really is. I mean, the impact that we can make when we get them right in a world that gets them wrong, like, it's huge. Like, they see, like, if they can see the way that we do it, and yes, some of them aren't going to like it, but others are going to be like, whoa, like, that works so much better than what we're doing. Like, what are they doing different? Like, we have God. We know God, and we know that he's the creator. Mm-hmm. And we know that if we follow his plan, things works out the best way.
Yeah.
So then we're going to finish up here in verse 23. We see Adam's reaction to Eve. This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. And I especially love that part at last. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it shows this longing that Adam had for a helper and his excitement and gratitude that he had for his wife now that she's here.
I imagine Adam going, woohoo! Yeah. Like, yes, at last.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So finally, like, his desire and longing for a helper was fulfilled at last when God made Eve. And Adam knew that Eve was exactly what he had been in need of. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a really beautiful picture of, like, the gift, the valuable gift that a wife can be for her husband, that we ladies can be for our husbands. Yep. And I think that's just a really cool picture.
Yeah, so what does this look like practically? Like, what does the helper role look like for ladies? Because it's one thing, I guess, to understand it, and hopefully our ladies and men are kind of tuning in that way and getting their minds wrapped around this idea of helper. But what does it practically look like day to day?
Well, I think that we can't really talk about the role of helper without talking about submission, and the importance of us submitting to our husbands.
That's a bad word in some circles.
Oh yeah, it gets a bad rap. But I think it's one of the ways that we as women get to point the world to Christ, and it's really cool when you understand it. Yeah. So in Ephesians 5 verses 22 through 24, it says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands." So God created men to lead their families and for wives to submit to their husbands. So neither role is inferior to the other. It's just the order that God created. Yep. And in case you've forgotten, Christ also submitted to God the Father.
Yeah.
And his plan in coming to earth and dying for our sins. And obviously Christ is God, and so he is not inferior.
Yeah.
Any way.
To claim that submission is an inferior position is to say that Christ was inferior to God. That's a blasphemous statement.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's an important point that a lot of people miss, that we need to understand and realize that us submitting does not mean that we are less valuable or less important or that our role is not as big.
Yeah.
It's just different.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a willing submission is a picture of what Christ did for us.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's one of the coolest things I love about this image. You know, when a wife submits to her husband leading rightly, that is a depiction to the world of Christ and his love for the church. Like, it's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. And the fact that we get to portray that, it's just really cool. And I think it's also important to note here that this submission is to our husbands and not to all men. Right.
It's for marriages.
Yes.
So, ladies,
it is not all women have to submit to all men. That is
correct.
Not true.
Yeah, ladies, if you are engaged, you do not have to submit to him yet. Now, it would be wise to understand that when you do get married, that will be a part of it. But also, husbands, remember, your wives are not commanded to submit to other men. Now, if you want to submit in leadership to your pastor or other things, and she wants to submit in leadership to you, that is good. But ladies, you do not have to submit to every guy on the street or in the public square or anywhere. You know?
Definitely not. I mean, like you kind of touched on, there are other areas of submission per se in life, like in a workplace environment, like in the church with the pastor, like that kind of thing. But like when in this context, like submission is to your husband and not all women to all men. So I think it's important too to remember that, ladies, like, as if you are not married, like, you choosing to marry someone is also choosing to submit to that person. And so if you don't feel like you can submit to that person, maybe that's not the right person. Or maybe you need to check your heart. But either way.
Well, I mean, I think you're being honest and loving in this. Ladies, if you're engaged and you evaluate the man and say, I can't submit to his leadership, you need to find another guy. Because if you're not willing to submit, you are setting yourself up for major difficulties, major hurdles that will not only cause your marriage to suffer, but display an improper image of Christ's love for the church. That holds a ton of weight, and we want to make sure that our marriages do display the love of Christ towards the church.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, as women, like, we need to follow our husband's lead. We need to submit to where he is going and what he wants us to do. Because if we're off doing our own thing and leading our own way, then we're not going to be a helper to our husband. No, you
kind of go outside of the help category, right?
Yeah.
Into the self-serving category.
Yeah, and then you're kind of going in two separate directions. So we have to follow. That's what God has called us to do.
Yeah.
And I think we also have to, of course, love our husbands, which, of course, but I think society they've lost what love even means anymore. Like, everything's so messed up. But, like, genuinely, like, be there for your husband. Like, love him, encourage him. The role that God has given them as the leader of a home is a heavy one.
Yeah.
And they need our help and our support and our encouragement and a listening ear. Like, they need us.
Yeah. And I'll touch onto this one. Ladies, when we also include the loving our husbands, we want to include the idea of have a passion and a desire for only your husband. Don't fawn after celebrities. That doesn't encourage your husband. That doesn't help your husband. If you are very excited to see Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and not excited to see your husband come through the door, there's something out of balance, and you need to check that.
Yeah.
Your love for your husband needs to surpass every other love for any other man on this planet. It needs to be for him, and it is to be almost a jealous love, where you desire his attention, his time, his effort, and most wives do desire those things, but too often I see, giddy talk about, well, this guy's a bodybuilder. I see how sometimes society and our culture encourages women to fawn over certain men and leave room for unfaithfulness to their husbands. Yeah. So that is definitely not a way to love your husband.
Definitely not. Also, as women, we kind of have the role of caring for the home. I think God has given that role to women, specifically, like a distinct role in the home. Titus 2 talks about that. Proverbs 31 talks about that. Men are kind of set up as the primary protectors and providers in the family. And then women kind of have the home as their own sort of domain in a way. Mm-hmm. And, you can take that as an insult like the feminists do, or you can see that as vastly important and incredibly impactful. The purpose of a home is vast and the impact is huge. There's so much that happens in a home.
Yeah.
That's where you spend a good portion of your time. That's where your family probably spends the most of its time together. Mm-hmm. That is where your children grow up learning all of the things that they learn. I mean,
what a Christian marriage looks like, what a home looks like. The home sets the tone for your family. It's a big deal. And your attitude and approach for your home will bleed out into your family, whether good or bad, right?
Yeah. And let me touch on this real fast. Kind of like you said, your attitude makes a big difference. And I understand that, and I struggle with that sometimes too, because we live in this world that they talk about, have to do the dishes and I have to do the laundry and I have to clean up all these messes after everyone else, and they make it seem like this horrible, awful thing that we're just stuck doing. And it is hard work, and it can be monotonous and at times, and there's a lot to it, but it also can be really beautiful, and your attitude towards it does make an impact. If your kids see you being fussy about everything that you have to do all the time, they're going to think that a woman's role is not fun, and then
they need to be fussy about doing their roles.
Yeah, and right? I mean, I get fussy sometimes.
A little bit. No.
No, I'll be honest. That. I mean, that's something that I have to work on at times, and so I get it and I relate. But there's also so much beauty to it, and the cooking and the cleaning and the laundry, the dishes and the decorating and all of the things that we as women do in our homes. And I mean, that's not even scratching the surface, what I listed.
You're kind of touching on all the things that people really tend to view in the negative, right?
Yeah. But all of the things that we do in a home, it's ways to serve our family, provide for their needs. And it's an opportunity for us to create an environment of joy and growth and have a strong family culture and Christian culture in our home, and it can be a really cool thing if you just see that.
I guess that's a good question to be asking ladies and men. Is your house, your home specifically, an environment that's warm, but maybe you don't want warm, but is it a place that you want to escape, or is it a place you want to be at, that you are excited to return to, right?
Right.
One of the things that I loved growing up with is a lot of my friends loved coming to my home. And that's because my home, compared to many of theirs, was a place of comfort, of warmth, of welcoming, and they didn't have those type of environments at home. And it was recognizable because they didn't want to be at their own houses. They wanted to be at mine. Your children, your husband, do they want to stay home instead of going out to another movie for another weekend, or doing some other event where you go on another vacation? Well, what about just home?
Yeah. You want your home to be a place that your family enjoys being.
Yeah.
And I mean, homes are where people are built.
Yeah.
And so if you want to have an impact on your family, on those around you, on future generations, a lot of that happens in the home. Yep. And so the power that we have there is really great. Mm. And it's really, I don't know, it's just really cool when you grasp a hold of it. And I'll touch on this more when we get to the glory point.
But it's where discipleship happens too. I mean, part of the Great Commission is discipling the nations, your children,
are part of that.
are part of that. And if you're neglecting that, you are disobeying the Great Commission and disregarding your role as being a discipler. And that goes for you too, men. As Megan pointed out, part of our role is to be the primary protectors, providers, but also the teachers. Husbands, wives, work on this together, but men, you need to lead in that especially. I know that's kind of off the wall. I know there's a ladies episode, but I want to make sure the men hear it,
Yeah, yeah. And I think that gets lost nowadays too. Like education a lot of times falls on
teachers.
Well, yeah,
or
teachers and moms.
And moms, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're, of course you have the homeschool moms, but even if you're not a homeschool mom, like still, like you think all of the things like tying shoes, ABCs, like, and then of course there's the spiritual side of things too, but a lot of that often falls on moms when like husbands, fathers should be making a lot of those decisions and should be leading a lot of that.
Yeah. Which doesn't necessarily mean, quitting his day job to homeschool.
Well, no.
But men, you do need to delegate and help lead and say, this is what we're going to do.
At least point a direction, and so that your wife knows what she needs to be doing.
Exactly.
And that kind of leads us into our next point is to be on mission with your husband. That's part of helping him. Like, as we talked about last week on the men's episode, like that men should have like a mission and a focus in life, and like they should know what they're here for, and they should be working towards what they feel like God has put them here for. And as wives, as helpers, it is our job to come alongside our husbands and help them on that mission.
Yep.
It is our job to understand, this is what mission that God has put my husband on. I am his wife. Like, I'm going to come alongside him and do whatever I can to help him. And I think that's a big point to touch on too, is that this role of helper is going to look completely different, like for each person.
Yeah.
Like, because like you are helping a specific person and each man is completely different. They have a different profession.
Yep.
They have different likes and dislikes and desires and passions and all of those things. And like, so your job as a wife is to see who your husband is, what he likes, what he doesn't like what he needs, and do what you can to take care of those needs. Do what you can to come beside him and help him and support him.
And encourage him.
Yes.
And one of the things that men need is an encourager, especially to follow and pursue God, to make changes, to take dominion for God's kingdom. Sometimes us men can get muddled down pretty easily. It doesn't take a whole lot to discourage us. At least I can speak for myself. Sometimes I can get pretty discouraged and not feel motivated to do a lot of things. The role of the encourager for the man that is wanting to pursue a life that honors God and that has a life and a family that does the same, that's why we have helpmates. That's why God gave us those things. And we work together on that. It's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. Like when you have a husband and a wife that, like the husband knows his mission and he's leading, and the wife comes, alongside of him and helps him and supports him and like does that in just the right way that he needs. Like it's just a really great picture, and it works so much better than what the world tries to do. Like so much better. Also, like just remember, ladies, like if you don't know, ask. Like if you don't know what your husband needs you to do as his helper, like ask him. If you don't know what mission your family is on, ask him. Just ask him.
Yeah, be patient with the men, because sometimes we take time to process those questions. I know us men sometimes will are not thinking about those things all the time. Some men are, which is great, but there are often times when we're in a different box
Yeah.
for multiple periods at a time. And when you get the question of what are we on mission for, they may be in the box where it's like, I needed to get a tire changed today. I'm not thinking about what my exact mission is. I was thinking about changing a tire. But be willing to ask those questions and then be patient to wait for an answer. Because if they're anything like me and a couple other men I know, that takes time to process and think through those things, especially because we want to care for our wives, our family, and give the best answer possible. We want to give our best efforts towards those things. That's why we get in those little boxes.
Yeah. So just know your husband. Know your husband. Encourage him. Help him. Think about his needs and his desires and his preferences, and focus on those things and do what you can to help him, and make it beautiful, and don't make it this grudging thing. But we'll get on that too when I talk about beauty. As we kind of switch over to this topic of glory. So the topic of the glory of a wife is a relatively new concept to me, but it's also really profound. So let's dig into the word in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 3 through 7.
Do you care if I read it?
Go for it.
Awesome. 1 Corinthians 11, 3, 7, it says, "But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ. The head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should not cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut her hair or to shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought not cover his head, since he is the image and the glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man."
Okay, Mark. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
So there in verse 7, where it says that man is the image and glory of God, like what would you say that means? Like, how would you explain that?
Well, I would probably say that in the beginning, God created man in his image. So initially in the creation account, when God was creating mankind, man came first, and we were created to be his image bearers, and a representation of his glory to this earth and on this earth. So we get a little bit of benefit to that, and then it goes on to say that woman was taken from man, right?
Yes. So I feel like this passage oftentimes gets a bad rap too, because it talks about that, like, the head of every man is Christ, and the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Like, so it talks about the wife, like, basically, like, it's like the wife's at the bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah.
Like, and then her husband's head over her, and then Christ is head over him, and then God is head over him. And then you also get down in verse 7 where it talks about, like you were just saying, that man is the glory of God, and then woman is the glory of man.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, like, people can feel like that, just like women are just inferior. Like, okay, men get to be the glory of God, but women are just the glory of man. Like, and this concept was explained so well to me in the book Even Exile by Rebecca Merkel. And I love how she explains it. And it talks about in the Bible how, like, the Holy of Holies. So that is basically the closest that you could get to God. Is that correct?
Within the temple. It was the closest place that you could go to experience or be close with God, the Holy of Holies. Only the select few were allowed to be even in that space. That was not allowed for the general public, right? Yeah.
So like it in verse 7 where it says that man is the glory of God and woman is the glory of the man. That puts women as the glory of God.
That's right.
And so she ties it to how in the Bible, like, and in the way that they spoke, like, Holy of Holies, like, that was the most holy place. Like,
holiest of holy places.
Yes, like, that was the most concentrated place of holiness. And it's kind of like that with women. Like, we are the most concentrated form of glory.
Yes.
And, like, when you look at it that way, it's, like, really powerful. And to think of, like, the feminists and what they're fighting for, they're fighting to not be women and to not be distinct from men, and to they're fighting against that glory.
They're fighting against being the glory of God and the glory of man. And it's really a sad fight. You know, we pity. I mean, you pity the person that fights for those things, because it's like, you're wanting to throw away glory of glory? That's crazy to me.
And we often don't see it like that. Like I said, this is a relatively new concept to me. Like, I really didn't hear it until I read this book, and I was like, whoa. Like, it kind of knocked my socks off. But so basically, we as women have the ability to, like, glorify things in a way. Like, we take something ordinary and we make it beautiful, and we give it meaning, and we flesh it out and make it this, like, precious thing. You know, like food. We take flour and sugar and eggs and
the
butter
things that
and
men often just provide and give to the wives, and then
we make it something great. Like, we
make it a cake, a delicious cake.
Yeah, we take a paycheck and we make a pot roast dinner. Like, we take a house and we turn it into a home.
Yeah.
Like we take ordinary things, we make them beautiful. And the realm and the scope of that is just unreal.
Yeah.
I think so many times, like, back to when we're talking about the home, like, because I think this ties in a lot to that. When people think about women, like, their biggest role being in their home and taking care of their families, and taking care of their houses and all that entails, they, like, feel like it's this tiny little box that, like, is just this, like, meaningless, mundane things, like, that women are stuck doing.
Yeah.
But that is completely not the right view. Like, when you realize that, like, you have the ability to, like the scope of what we can do as women is so vast.
Yeah.
Like, we can, like, beautify our homes. We can change them up. We can decorate them. We can make fancy meals for our family. We can
remodel the house.
Yes.
Garden, everything.
Yeah. And I mean, basically, the sky is the limit. What does your family care about? What is most important to them? Like, you take a birthday and you turn it into this extraordinary event. You take Christmas and you make traditions. Like, that's something that I'm wanting to do and be more intentional with this year. Like, I've never really done much, like, Advent wise, or, like, I've never been huge on, like, traditions per se.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing more of the value in that, like, in a home and a family, and, like, making those traditions with your family, and, like, the culture and the togetherness that creates.
Yeah.
And I'm wanting to be intentional about that this year, and do, like, an Advent type thing with our family this year, and have special activities and gifts and all this stuff planned. And, like, and that is something that I am choosing to delve into as my role in the home.
Yeah.
And that is a way of, like, beautifying and glorifying. Like, I am taking the resources that you have provided for our family, and the things that we have, and the time and the energy and the season of Christmas, and I'm taking it and trying to make it as beautiful and meaningful as I can.
Yeah.
And that is a way of being the glory of God.
Yeah. And it does bring glory to God, and it reflects to this world how God makes things beautiful, how he brings glory to mankind. And I think so often that's kind of just brushed over. Like you said, a couple times, we have lost sight of the value of the home, right? Like, and let me even press in on this a little bit, right? We're talking about, areas where the husbands kind of help lead and say, I want you to take care of the food or the home. But let's apply it to the family. You talked about Advent, things like that. Think about the role of a mother that gets to stay home with her children, right? Not only are you going to disciple them, but you are discipling them in such a way that it is glory of glory. Not only is it the husband's desire for you to do that, but then you are going to beautify that process with your children. And, this is not me trying to make a case for every woman to stay at home, but if that's the desire that God has laid on the husband's heart and wants to lead in that way, wives, that is a awesome opportunity to beautify and to raise your children up in the glory of our Lord. And that's that seems like such a big thing, and people brush past it. And what's sad is our culture has almost forcibly shoved women into the workforce and out of the home, so they cannot do those things.
Yeah,
not do them as well, or not do them to the full extent in which they could if they were at home.
Yeah,
right?
Just where our culture is unreal. We've lost the beauty of all of this that we women can do in our homes, and just in our gender itself. Like, it's lost its meaning and beauty in so many different ways, and we've lost the importance and the excitement of all that we get to do in the home. But we've lost the beauty and the meaning and the excitement in what we get to do in our homes, and we have went off to the workforce, which, like you said, our society has made it to where it is difficult to have a one income household.
Yeah.
And so that challenges things. But I also want to point back to the fact, though, that until recent history, men were at home a lot too. Their work and their business, their income was usually at the home or near the home. They either farmed at their home, or they had businesses that were ran in or near their home. And so all of those changes, with the Industrial Revolution and all of that have taken the men away from the home, and then now the women out of the home, and it has made things much more difficult. It's not impossible. Women can still stay home, and I think that is an admirable thing to do. I'm not saying that it is always right for every woman, but every woman's in a different season.
Correct.
An empty nester, or a woman who isn't married yet, is single, or who doesn't have kids yet, their schedule is going to look completely different than me, a mom with 3 little kids that are very busy and everywhere.
Though I will say to the empty nesters, you have a wonderful opportunity to be the best grandparent ever if you can maintain the not working.
Yes.
So husbands, older husbands, empty nesters, if you can maintain the aspect of your wife staying at home, you will provide an opportunity for your wife to be a grandmother in ways that just can't. It is so valuable. One of the things that I've talked about before, I believe, is I love how much Meagan talks about her grandparents and her family. They were very connected. And I'm not saying that I wasn't connected to my family, but when she talks about them, I'm often jealous because I feel like I didn't get the time or as much connection, because honestly, a lot of people in my family had to work. They didn't have the time to just come and spend time with me, to go on walks. Those happen few and far between. It didn't happen on a regular basis. And what an impact you can make as the glory of the man being the glory of God. It is a really, really cool thing.
Well, definitely. And I'll tag on to that. Like, not only that, but like the resource that you can be for your children as they have young children and you are helping and coming alongside them. Like, just that is a help and a blessing for sure. Yeah. Because being parents is hard and it's a lot of work. And to have like grandparents to have a grandmother that is at home, like, and has her time freed up to where if you need her, she's there. Like, that's a big blessing.
And it's weird that our society has continued to push this idea that people need to be out on their own and not even attached to their parents, right? It's as if they're calling us to disobey our fathers and mothers, to not honor them, and also deal harshly with our children after they're out of the home, right? Like, once they're out of the home and married, you don't need to take care of them. They're their own problems now. They got their own issues. No, you are still tied to them. And young husbands and wives, they're still your fathers and mothers. You need to honor them and try to honor them. Now, you are your own individual family. You have responsibilities. But if your parents get sick, if you have things that they need help with, think about if the roles were reversed. You would definitely want to be the help there. But just look at the images that we have of generations past. Families stuck together tightly.
Yeah, they did.
Tightly.
I mean, generational living was a thing. Like, you thought about your future generations and you invested in your future generations, and like you were...
I mean, grandparents lived with you.
Yeah, a lot of times. And
that was not a bad thing. They had enormous amounts of wisdom and help, and gosh, I the list could go on. I know I only gave two, but I'm just thinking about it in my head. I mean, it's a beautiful picture when you look at it, especially in the grand scheme of what God has orchestrated for us as children. I know that's kind of off topic. It kind of ties in. But we want to address, kind of all encompassing both sides there.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much realm and scope of our role as women, and it's just a shame that like we don't see that so many times, that there's so much space and so many different areas that we can invest in, and that we can like be present and be mindful and for our families that we don't even see. Like, like we take their hopes and their desires and their wants and these ordinary things that they have, and we like make something extraordinary out of them. We think about like what they care about, and we like figure out how to like treasure that or give them more of that, or like
give it more meaning, purpose.
Yeah. And
us men have a hard time doing that. There's a lot of times when I can think of a project and think of how to do it, one way or another. And then my wife will come in and tell me, have you thought about this? Have you thought about so-and-so? Like, helps get the emotional side of things in balance for me, because sometimes I can be pretty cut and dry, as some of y'all may know.
I feel like God has just given us as women like this element of creativity, like, and if we choose to invest that in the home, like there's so much that we can do with it. Like there's so much. I can't even touch on the scope of it. And I mean, it's going to be different for everybody. Like take what you're passionate about, what your family is passionate about, like what their favorite foods, their favorite things, their favorite places and colors, and like, make the best birthday parties ever, and make, your husband's favorite dinner for his birthday, or his favorite breakfast for Christmas, or
steak and potatoes.
There you go. Like, figure out what they love and what they love to eat and master it. Like, figure out what they love to do and provide opportunities for them to do that. Like, surprise them.
And you can't ever go wrong with apple pie and bacon. That's an inside joke for some of our listeners. So
yeah, but there's just so much to it, and I can't touch on it all because it's going to be so different for every woman. Like, based on, like I said earlier, like, your role as helper is to help your husband. Like, and each husband is different, so your job is going to be different. It's going to look different, but you just take what God has given you and the man and the kids that He's given you, and like, figure out how to serve them in the best ways, in the most beautiful ways, and like, make it fun and make it enjoyable, and make a life that they enjoy living, like, make a home that they enjoy being in, make food that they enjoy eating. Like, there's just
make life beautiful.
Exactly. And we have so much power to do that. And
God has equipped you to do that specifically.
Yes. And specifically going back to talking about, being at home, like, I think when you can be at home, when a husband can provide financially, and a wife can be at home, she's freed up like so much room and time and like mental capacity to be able to really invest and dig in and like do beautiful things. And yes, it's messy sometimes. Like, making beautiful things is messy, but it's also so rewarding and it's so meaningful, and you get such a beautiful end result. And it's worth the effort. It's worth every bit of it.
Yeah. And the most important thing is that it is God honoring. It is fulfilling the role that God has called you to, that He's equipped you to do. Right? So if your aim in this life is to submit to Christ, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to look like help and glory.
Yeah.
And that's a great picture.
It really is. It really is.
Hey, we appreciate you guys so very, very much for joining in, listening to us today. We're going to wrap up this episode, but we hope you'll join us for our next one. Couple things before we wrap up this episode. We've only got 2 more episodes of this season left, and then we might take a little break or start a new season. We're still figuring that out. But on the last episode, we kind of want to do a Q&A session. So send us your questions. We have an email set up on our YouTube page. Check that out. Send us an email. We will keep the questions private if you want and just answer them. But we would love for you guys to give us some questions that we can answer. We're also planning on doing like a fun episode where we do our top 10 favorite hymns or some top 10 episode. But that's coming up. So if you want to submit those questions, go ahead and start submitting those so we can get a heads up and answer them well. But we really appreciate you guys for joining us tonight.
Definitely. I hope you ladies saw my passion, and I hope that you have grabbed a hold of some of this and you realize the beauty in our roles, and that it's not a lesser than thing. It's a really amazing, beautiful thing that God has given us. Absolutely.
Our hope and prayer is that you'll join us in our aim to firmly tie our marriages together in threefold measure.
Knotted firmly to Christ and each other for the glory of God and His kingdom.
Hey, if you liked what you heard and you want to hear future episodes, make sure you subscribe, drop a like, give us a review, and like I said, submit those questions for our Q&A episode coming up. Join us next time as we are going to be discussing the topic of death. I know that sounds pretty grim, but we're actually going to be specifically addressing the topic of death surrounding marriage. What does it mean when we say death do us part? What does death look like for eternity? What does our marriage look like in eternity? Are we living in light of eternity? We're going to be talking about death, and then maybe touch in some how death affects the marriage. because Megan and I have lost a child, and we may even tie in some things with that. Might be a full encompassing episode about death. And I know that may not sound exciting, but it is good stuff to be equipped for and ready, because in a marriage, you will most certainly face it.
Yeah.
So please come back, listen, and share us. So that's an exciting thing.
Yeah. And until then, cling to Christ as we tie together in threefold measure.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.